Denizens of the night, welcome to another special episode. Tonight, we will continue our trek into the black heart of the city. I hope you've enjoyed our journey so far. If you'd like to listen to every episode of the city back to back, you can find a link to our playlist on the channel's main page. Enjoy.
Chapter 2. Max was part of something again, and the excitement revived him. Forgotten were his qualms with Harris and the Force. A mental deal had been struck with his inner demons, and memories of his family receded to their temporary hiding place, so a new escape could fill his mind's eye. A case that horrified everyone else. Max hated most aspects of homicide investigation, but he loved those first moments after leaving a crime scene. It was like the briefest caress from a new lover. Everything was still possible, and curiosity ran high. Success felt close enough to grasp, as long as the hunter kept up the momentum. Which was why Max wasn't about to slow down. It was almost 8:30 under the spring moon when Max found himself in the lavish compound of Shinsho, the leather pouch Harris gave him in the pocket of his trench coat. A woman in a floral print cheongsam led him through the house, whose upstairs doubled as a high-end brothel, the soft, sad twangs of a zither zheng harp audible through the quiet halls. Though Max didn't see the musician, the notes were growing louder. He didn't see the incense either, but its pungent smell was detectable throughout the house, same as the music. Despite the soothing atmosphere, flashes of boneless, splayed-out skin danced in his head. The patience and skill needed to carry out such mutilation meant the act itself was a message. But who was the intended audience? And what about the missing bones? Were they trophies? The woman stopped at a beaded curtain, the sad, cascading plucks coming from just beyond. She gestured him through, and Max parted the beads to Shinsho's office. A single electric lamp kept most of the room dark. Below it, a woman sat on a silk pillow. Her dress was low-cut and vibrant, reminiscent of Tang Dynasty outfits. In front of her was the harp. She drew out a long final note as Max stepped up to Shin's desk. "Mr. Elliot." The ancient voice came from pools of shadows and pipe smoke. The musician stood and moved from the glow of the lamp to the hazy darkness of the voice. Max adjusted to the meek lighting, and he saw the woman walking back, a hand-carved pipe in her palm. She passed him, then the beaded curtain, leaving Max and his host alone. Sho sat behind a long wooden table. He wore a tang zhuana, black as his braided hair, fitted with gold trim. His face was still as lean as the last time they'd spoken, and Max was impressed that the few lines running down his cheeks never denounced the man as old. They just solidified his air of wisdom and power. "Shinsho, thank you for seeing me on such short notice." Sho gestured for Max to sit. Max obliged, and knowing his time was limited, he removed the pouch and laid it on the table, pulled the drawstrings wide to reveal the grayish powder. "Have you ever seen this substance before?" Sho took the pouch and studied its contents. The muscles of his lean cheeks flexed. "Did you buy it yourself?" "What is it?" "Most call it Sifeng." Shinsho cinched the bag and tossed it back on the desk between them. "Best to leave alone." Max's neck and cheeks flushed with anger first, then shame. "It's not for me." Shinsho scrutinized him with intense green eyes that had never dulled in all the years Max knew him. "I found it at a crime scene," Max said. "I suggest you look for another clue." 3 young girls were butchered, chained like animals in a dead man's apartment. I can't walk away. Max, this like nothing you ever experienced. It may have something to do with Eve and Leanne. Max leaned in, but ignored the siren call of the sweet aroma still clinging to Shinsho from his pipe. No cryptic warnings. Just tell me what it is, please. Sho closed his eyes, breathed deep, then fixed a penetrating gaze on Max. It is a drug. A drug I have never sold. Powerful, though. Well beyond what you find in opium den. It was hidden under the floorboards. Maybe the man was a pimp controlling the girls through addiction. If this is a new drug, then I'm guessing only a few people know how to make it. Should be easy to track down. No. Sho shook his head slowly. It is old. Very old. But you are correct. Only a few know of it. I am surprised they would have overlooked this when finished with the murder. Any idea who they are? Max said. The answer came out thin and wispy as breath. The Mara. Equally as soft, Sho said, the only chemists who can make sulfen are the Mara. Mara, Max said, as if repeating the foreign word would somehow expand its meaning. Your victim, Pimp, no doubt had dealings with Mara. The others, they are sometimes called. This man cheated them in some way, sold this. Shin gestured to the pouch. Without authorization. The others have an unforgiving nature. The deaths are retribution. Max pulled out a small leather-bound notepad, the lead of his pencil etching into the paper. He looked up from his hastily scratched notes. Seems like new Chinese gangs are coming out of the woodwork every month or so. These Mara, are they a Tong? They are not a gang. Fine. Max dared a bit of sarcasm. Where do these non-gang murderers meet? Shinsho pressed his lips together. Interesting. Max picked up the pouch. If I pursue this, will I find it has something to do with you? Not at all. Shinsho smiled. Some things are simply not discussed. You'll learn that if you follow this path. Sho extended his hand, index finger long and slender, pointing to the exit. Max turned and saw the servant girl and the floral cheongsam waiting at the beaded exit. He looked back at Shinsho. Thanks for your time. The painted lips of the woman who brought him to Sho still held the same obedient smile as earlier, yet Max knew his face was lackluster compared to the enthusiasm he'd arrived with. Unfazed by Max's change in demeanor, she led him back down the hallway. In the large foyer, two women lounged on a puffy couch, conversing in whispers. From the office, which now felt so far away, the Zither Jung's song resumed. Mr. Elliot? A soft voice called from halfway up the sweeping staircase. Her voice vibrated into him with the same sad frequency as the Zither Jung's notes. Max stopped a few feet from the front door, hesitating to look. The void created by the pause was filled by the harp's tune of beautiful longing. Finally, he turned to the woman. Yanmei. He murmured her name as quiet as a secret. Max watched the robed woman descend, then stop at the second-to-last step, waiting just above the floor. He could imagine her naked flesh just beneath the thin white fabric, the softness of her hair bun in his hands. Smiling, always smiling and cordial, the host woman at his side asked Max, Stay tonight? At his right, Yanmei waited, silent and beautiful. Before him, the exit. But what waited beyond the door, anyway? More dead ends? Harris had provided only one clue, and if Shinsho refused to speak on the powder's manufacturers, Max had nothing. Just like there was nothing left at his apartment. If there was another lead, Max would continue the case. But why should he exert further effort on an outcome he knew all too well? Defeat sunk into his bones, extinguishing the fire of the chase he'd experienced earlier. Yanmei's presence simply clarified what he already knew, and it was time to come to terms with that truth. These three girls were no different from his family's tragedy. It was an American Ripper story, and as such, this Chinatown Jack's identity would never be discovered, just as certain mysteries were destined to remain hidden. For now, Yanmei's room sounded more inviting than Ku's laundry den. "Sure," Max said. "I'll stay." Max rolled a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching Yanmei finish drawing the bath. She had brought opium with the alcohol, but he'd stopped her from preparing it and asked for the bath show instead. The paraphernalia sat, unused, beside a cross-legged Max, surrounded by pillows on a large rug. With seductive grace, Yanmei parted the kimono and let it slip to the ground. She made a spectacle of dipping her pedicured foot into the steaming, sudsy water before submerging her body. The upward points of her small breasts enjoyed brief visibility as the displaced water sloshed around them. Though his eyes were focused, Max's thoughts were elsewhere. He downed the rest of the whiskey, hoping to anesthetize his mind and bring his attention back to the concubine. Yanmei's black hair was pinned up with chopsticks to stay dry. Her painted face also managed to avoid water as she raised her legs out of the water, one at a time, caressing soapy bubbles over their smooth skin. It was how she'd gotten Max to lower his defenses the last time he'd been here. "You were supposed to be done for good after that night." But those words were sworn back when Max had thought his wife was still alive. He stretched up and over to the coat rack next to him, not fully leaving the comfort of the velvet pillows, and pulled the leather pouch from his trench coat. He opened it, and, though the powder was odorless, he gave a sniff, confirming the fact to himself once more. The whiskey spun his resistance to mush, and when he looked back at Yanmei, his testicles twitched with desire. Max thought about replacing the opium in the pipe with the Si Fen. Of course, he wouldn't allow Yanmei to partake, not with all the mystery surrounding the drug. But why shouldn't Max test out the high? Who was Shinsho or anyone to tell him what he could handle? Sloshing, dripping sounds guided his attention from the pipe and back to the tub. Yanmei had risen, water cascading down her body as she reached for a towel on the bamboo and silk changing divider. She patted herself dry, then went behind the screen and put on a kimono. "I love baths," she said, sitting on the rug with him. "I pretend I come out of the ocean, that I am fresh and alive. Do you like the beach, Mr. Elliot?" Of all the questions to ask, why the beach? The tiny hands that emerged in Ku's den were back. But instead of wrapping around his puzzle box, they parted the muddled clouds inside his head. His daughter's hands tore through the wispy coverings created by alcohol to blind Max from pain. Envisioning Leanne endangered his pact with the darkness inside, and the longer he forced himself to look at Yanmei's alluring smile, the more his daughter's face transposed on the prostitute. The ensuing nausea worked to sober him. "Everything okay?" "Just fine. My missing daughter's favorite place to visit is the beach. Did I mention she's probably dead?" Or perhaps she wasn't. Yanmei looked anxious, but Max could think of nothing to say that would assuage her concern. How could he explain his thoughts when it was a battle to understand them himself? Over the past 3 years, The regularity of his mood shifts from elation to despair had increased. The frequency of occurrences reached its apex after the tragedy, and clearly he was still riding the crest of the phenomena. A void had formed where his sense of purpose and direction should have been housed. The vacuous longing hadn't formed overnight from a single event. It had grown over time. And Max was now a servant to his unhinged, unfocused will, cognizant he was a victim to passing whims, yet unable to stop it. "Mr. Elliot?" Her voice trembled a bit, and it only served to remind Max of her age. Disgusted with himself, Max staggered to his feet, retrieving his coat and fedora. "Sorry, Yanmei. I have to go." "Why you leave this way?" She pulled the kimono tighter. "You say I'm beautiful, then run. Have I offended you?" "You are beautiful," Max said. "I'm the one who's ugly."